episode, we explore how adaptive clothing allows people to maintain independence and dignity, and how accessibility and fashion can go hand in hand.
Jimmy Zolo is the co-founder and CEO of Joe Bella, a premium adaptive apparel brand that's creating stylish, innovative clothing that makes dressing easier, faster, and more dignified for older adults and for the caregiver. So inspired by his own family's experience caring for a loved one in a memory care community, Jimmy is passionate about bringing dignity and independence to millions of older adults through thoughtfully designed products. Previously, Jimmy was a part of Grubhub's early team, helping drive national expansion, and later co-founded Collaborata, a consumer insights company that worked closely with AARP. And under his leadership, Joe Bella has achieved national recognition, winning multiple innovation awards and building strategic partners with senior living communities, healthcare providers, and major retailers.
Jimmy, thank you so much for being here today. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I am super excited that you are here to talk with us about all the things. And so maybe we should just start at the beginning. So tell us a little bit about your own caregiving journey and how that led to where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. I got into caregiving because of my grandparents. I was working at a startup in Chicago called Grubhub, then later founded a marketing research firm. But at the time, my grandfather had Parkinsonia dementia, and my grandmother was a wheelchair user after struggling with PT after her second hip surgery. And so from about the last 10 years of her life, she lived as a wheelchair user. And later in her life, she developed dementia. And so that's how we got into it. And back in 2012, they moved on into a memory care community, which was a tough experience and tough transition. And they lived there they actually moved around quite a bit. But that's how we got into it and have a lot of experience of helping care for someone with both physical needs and pretty significant cognitive changes.
Oh, wait, hold on. I got multiple questions I got to ask.
Okay.
So one thing is...
Normally we take turns. But
I know. Okay. On my head, I was like, I got to ask a couple more follow-up questions before we dive deeper into why. So she had a hip surgery and never really recovered from it, was in the wheelchair. That's what you're telling us? And yes. These are grandparents that are married, that are together. They were moving together into memory care. Okay.
It was a big controversy, though, to get them on into memory care together.
I was actually going to ask about that because that is really challenging to do, to place couples together. Why that isn't always... Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Tell us.
It was so hard. And anyone who's gone through it recognizes it's hard for a few different reasons. Number one, as the family, you're thinking, hey, is this the right place for them? Is this the right time for them? Is there anything we can possibly do to keep them at home longer, safer, give them the type of care that they need, but at home where they want to be? And for us, we had this tipping point, which was my grandmother kept falling despite having 24/7 in-home care. And it kept happening. So we were looking around. We had picked out which care community was the right fit for them, but we were still pushing it off. And she fell again, and the fire department had to come on out this time because the caregiver with my grandfather there weren't able to get her up, and she wasn't safe, and they're worried about that. Maybe something is broken. And the fire department said, hey, we've been out several times in the last month, and it's just not working. And so that was it. So she moved the next day, which actually was Christmas Eve of 2012. So there's a whole story with that part of it. And my grandfather followed about 2 weeks later. And he, at that point, we were really looking for the memory care community for him and less so for my grandmother at that point because his dementia had started progressing pretty rapidly and he wasn't safe being at home alone and he needed a higher level of care and professionals who really understand what cognitive change means and how to care for that specific use case. And he just did not want to move. He loved his home. He loved being around all of his things. He loved all about it. But the trick for him was to say, my dad was the one who convinced him. He said, hey, Dad, you get to have bacon every morning. That did it. That's what
that was the trigger.
That was the trick.
I love that.
After 2 weeks of back and forth and trying to convince him that this is a good thing, hey, you get to be with your wife who you spent the last 70 years with.
Nope. Not worry about that. Bacon, though?
Bacon.
It was the bacon.
Yeah. You know what? I get that. I was vegan for over a year and didn't mind at all. It was great. And then one day I was making my kids bacon and I was like,
what am I doing?
What am I doing with my life?
Yeah.
Why am I not eating this bacon? And then it was all over.
Interestingly, I went vegan for over a year too.
Did you?
And I'm also not vegan anymore.
Yeah, well, Nothing lasts forever.
Right.
Okay, sorry.
Keep going.
Keep going with your story though. I think this is
So
something that a lot of people can relate to.
Yeah.
yeah, and so when we moved my grandmother in, it was Christmas Eve of 2012. So that afternoon, we had moved her, started setting up her room and making sure everything was there. And anyone who's gone through the experience knows, and getting your loved one into the memory care community, getting that room set up is a horrible process. It's stressful. A lot of communities, especially back then, this was 13 years ago at this point, they didn't have Wi-Fi. Getting the TV to work was a whole thing. Getting the router set up for internet in her room was a whole thing. Making sure she could watch Jeopardy was a whole thing. And finally, by the time we're fully set up, it's probably 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. There's a skeleton crew at the community because it's people are off for Christmas and holidays, and we're finally, after getting her set up, getting a tour of the community. And as we're walking around the community, I think we stuck out for being sad and depressed and sort of like walking with our heads down, thinking, man, this is what we're all doing on Christmas Eve. And man, is this the right place? And this is such a big change for them. We call my grandmother Aya. Is Aya going to be okay here? Is she going to have people that she likes? When are we going to be able to get Papa there too? She going to like the food? She was a tough woman and who didn't get along with everyone. So is she going to get along with the people here? She had a history of firing caregivers without telling us. So we were a little worried about all of it. And so as we're getting a tour of this community, two of the residents actually jumped in line with us and slowly took over the tour. And they started joking with us. They were making fun of us in a very fun way. And that ended up being Joe and Bella, who we named our company after. And they were two residents who had met later in life, two widowed Holocaust survivors. And they ended up eating every meal with my grandmother and grandfather until the day my grandfather passed. And they ended up becoming part of our family, just amazing, amazing people who we owe a lot to for really changing the way in which we thought about memory care, changing the way we thought about aging. Man, that night was sort of everything. We left smiling and hopeful, and I'll never forget it.
Wow, that's a pretty incredible story.
Yeah. Did not know that's where the name Joe and Bella came from.
No. I mean, first of all, what I love about that story is that in the end, it's actually about like kindness.
Mm.
That like these two strangers saw that your family was struggling and they decided to be kind. And ultimately, like it changed your grandparents' lives for the better. It changed your family's lives for the better. Like just this little act of kindness. And now like Joe and Bella also exists, and it's named after these people who just all they did was just they decided to be kind. Like that's a very powerful thing to do. So Joe and Bella is about adaptive clothing. How did you go from your grandparents' story to like zeroing in on like clothing is the thing that is, that we're passionate about here?
Yeah, it was like everything is part of this story. I think anyone here, it was not by choice in a way. It was not intentional. It happened. So for that, my grandfather had passed and my grandmother was still living in the memory care community, a different one. She later moved. But when COVID hit, we got locked out of her community, which, man, talk about another really tough experience in trying to navigate that. Similarly, we were on the phone, we were researching, hey, can we get her out of there? Should we be moving her to our home? But man, we have all these stairs and she's in a wheelchair. Can we make our home wheelchair accessible and find a caregiver that we can bring in? Going through all of that, but decided, hey, it's best now. She's in a bubble. That bubble is going to be way tighter and safer than the bubble that we would create at our own home. And she has all the caregivers there. So the challenge was, hey, how do we communicate with someone? And at this point in her aging journey, her dementia had really progressed to the point where she could no longer answer a phone. We had tried the thing where you go stand outside the window and wave on in. And that was almost more frustrating than anything else because she was saying, hey, what? Come closer, come on in. What are you doing out there? So what we ended up doing was setting a tablet in her room, which was a no answer tablet where we could just pop on in and FaceTime with her whenever we wanted, which was this amazing thing and allowed us to communicate with her in a really natural way. For her, it felt like we were there with her. And one of these days I popped in and I got to see what it was like for her to get ready in the morning. And I couldn't believe it. Normally when I would see her, she knew exactly what day or time I was going to be there. She'd be waiting for me in the lobby, hair done, makeup on, fully dressed. She'd have a dog cookie because I'd always show up with my dog Simba. Now I got to see what it was like for her to get dressed. And start to finish while I was talking to her, it was about 25 minutes. And the entire time she was making painful sounds. Then it got to the point where she was actually screaming. She swore. It was the first time I ever heard her swear before. She was crying from the pain, and it was just a shocking experience. And so I called the nurse afterwards. And by the way, the nurse was kind and gentle and patient, and she did everything right and took her time. She wasn't rushing, anything like that. And the nurse said, yeah, this happens every single time your grandmother has to get dressed. This is also about average for what we handle here. And she told me, hey, there's a former Chicago Bear, a former football player who's in his early 60s who has CTE from his days playing football. And it takes multiple staff members to try and get him dressed in the morning. And occasionally he gets so anxious about that experience that they've left his room with bruises before because it can get physical. And so I was like, all right, well, this all seems a little ridiculous and there has to be a better way. And I figured there was. And I spent some time researching adaptive apparel. So clothes that are altered in a way to make dressing less painful, a little bit easier, hopefully safer. And I found a couple clothing options, but I was concerned because to me, they looked like brands out of the 1980s. And my grandmother was very much a woman of her generation in that she wore a dress and high heels every single day. Always never would have a hair out of place, the exact opposite of me. And, and I said, you know what, these might not look like what she would normally wear, but at least she wouldn't have to
struggle,
go through what she went through every morning.
Yeah.
At least she wouldn't have to go through that level of pain every morning. So I ordered a bunch of stuff, sent it to her, then popped in the room when the package arrived so I could see her open it with one of the nurses of the community. And as she opened the package, she looked at it, she took a couple shirts out, I said, hey, what do you, if you look straight in the camera, she goes, too ugly. And she refused to wear any of it. She'd rather deal with that pain than wear something that didn't align with her identity. And this is at a point where, man, there was plenty of days she didn't know my name. There's plenty she didn't know about where she was. But she could still look at a piece of clothing and say, no, this is or this is not me. And that stuck with me. That piece of our identity never went away. So that was the genesis of Joe and Bella. Is I said, all right, well, maybe we can figure this out. Maybe my family can figure this out. Is there a way to make dressing faster and easier and less painful while still making clothes that people actually want to wear that still feel like what they're used to wearing and matches everything else in their closet? So that's what we're up to now.
So what was your next step after that? Because the thing I would think is like, well, let me just take her clothes and like cut them up and put some extra zippers in them and then like make her stuff easier. I don't know that I would be like, let me make a whole company that sells this to everybody. So maybe you had that pathway. Maybe your pathway is different.
that is actually exactly what you would probably do.
As I was saying that, I was like, actually, that's exactly what I did for AskSAMIE.
Yeah,
so I get it, actually, if that is the pathway it took. But just tell us what the next one is.
Well, in some ways, it probably helps that my skill set wasn't that. I don't have the ability to cut things up and sew things. I have no skills like that, but I come from startup. So I figured, hey, maybe there's a way to do something that is a true company. And my first step was, hey, I know nothing about clothing. I know nothing about apparel. I know nothing about the industry at all. I need to find somebody who does. And eventually I found a woman, her name's CareZips. She's up in Canada. Her background, she was early on at Lululemon, and then she designed the first several lines for the nursing scrub brand Figs. And if you don't know Figs, next time you go to the doctor's office, I bet you there's a 75% chance your nurse and or doctor will be wearing Figs. You'll see a white logo at the top left of the shirt. And Figs makes functional nursing apparel that's better. It looks good. Nurses feel confident and they can wear it all day. And so I thought, hey, that's a really interesting background of skills, from nursing functional apparel to Lululemon everyday athleisure clothes that are modern and look great. And so I really wanted to work with Kara, and Kara said no. And so I kept asking Kara, and finally she was about to say no to me again. We had a call scheduled, but the day before this call, it was her grandmother's 95th birthday, and she bought the grandmother something that the grandmother couldn't. And after that moment, Kara said, okay, fine, I'll design some clothes for you. I get it. And she's since gone on to say that her work for Joe and Bella is the most important work of her life. And I was really fortunate to have found Kara and have our clothes designed by someone with that type of skill and expertise, which I just do not have.
So you had this experience that led you to this idea, finally found someone who could like kind of help you bring it to life. I think what I'm curious about next, and I think like personally as because Brandy and I are both occupational therapists. So like in OT school, did you have to learn how to sew in OT school?
We definitely did.
Yeah.
I knew how to sew before that, but we used sewing skills in class. For sure.
Yeah, because
we make up stuff.
Because we make up stuff and we adapt clothing and things like that.
Right.
So what I'm getting to here though is like, you knew it was an issue. A small group of people knew that this was an issue. How did you get the world to understand that this is actually a big problem that matters, like really matters for quality of life for people?
Yeah, we're still trying to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we're here and talking to folks like you. So look, anyone who will let us spread the word, whether that's through a podcast or an interview or a news article or a blog or social media post, we're going to do it. I think there is a stigma about companies that create products for older adults in this country. And there's a stigma for caring for older adults in this country. The U.S. is backwards in a lot of ways when it comes to how we care for our loved ones. And so for us, we talk a lot about how do we normalize, not stigmatize. And one of the things that's been interesting to us that's really helped has been 40% of the sales for our best-selling product, our men's button-down, actually go to men below the age of 40, which is not something that was intentional, is not something that we expected. And when we started looking at the numbers, we're really confused. And we started calling up our customers and trying to figure out, hey, what's going on here? And one example of how this is happening is, and why this is happening is last holiday season, I saw there was a woman who had a really big order. And the interesting thing about the order, though, is she got multiple shirts in the same color. And so I called her up and said, hey, I saw you got 3 of the navy and 3 of the gray and 3 of the white. What's going on? Are you getting one for each? So that your dad, your loved one has a lot of them. She goes, no, my dad, who is in his 90s, there's zero chance he will wear adaptive apparel because he's going to think it's for old people, or he's going to think it's for people with disabilities, and he's going to have those biases. But I'm going to give it to him as a gift Christmas morning. And I'm also going to give the gift to my 2 sons who are in college, who he thinks are really cool. And so when they see what it is and they see how fun it is to put on one of these shirts, because so our button downs are magnetized, so you don't have to do the buttons. It almost goes on by itself. When they see how cool it is and he sees the son's reactions to that, he's going to not be stigmatized about it. And that's been a big piece of it is we want to show people of all different ages, of all different backgrounds, of all different ability levels wearing our clothes so that those who really need it, those who our clothes would make a difference in their lives every day, don't feel different when they wear them. And that's what we're fighting against.
I think that's just such a great example of also how like accessibility is for everyone.
Yes.
It is not for the other or people that we think of as other. Accessibility benefits us all. And it can bring us all together and make everyone's life easier. Like I love that example. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. We believe in universal design, which is you design for the hardest possible use case you can imagine. And the result of that is something that's great for everybody. That's how, there are just countless examples of products and services that come through that way, or even things that are small, like weighted blankets were designed for children with different needs. Well, everyone loves a weighted blanket. It's the same thing with adaptive apparel. Yeah.
Totally. I'm really glad that you brought up universal design, because the definition of it is about creating spaces that everyone can access no matter what their level of ability, but it's not necessarily directed at clothing. And when you were just speaking about how accessibility is for all, I was thinking it's the same concept of universal design, but for our clothing, because why should it be hard for any of us to get dressed, right? Like, I like a good pair of CareZips that I can just step into just like anybody else does, even though I'm theoretically possible for me to reach down and put my foot in my shoe, right? And so why not make it easier for everybody and also feel good and look good so you can feel good?
CareZips is such a perfect, what an amazing design and hundreds of patents that company has. But they're such a perfect example of universal design. And if you go to their website, it feels like a modern e-commerce brand, but they make sure that they're advertising for adults with different needs. When my wife was pregnant, she was getting ads for them. Hey, these are the best shoes for pregnant women, which they absolutely are. But they're the perfect example of threading that.
So when you think about how you can continue to share the message and help make sure that it feels normal, how do you bring out the accessibility piece of the clothing without making it feel like it's othering? Does that make sense?
It does. Now, I'll give you an example of one that we really struggled with and still struggle with to a degree. Is the first product we came out with was a pants called CareZips. What CareZips is two zippers on either side down the waist, from about waist, hip to knee. And then it is third zipper on the inseam that essentially wraps around the crotch. And that design is specifically for incontinence products, so adult diapers. So 80% of folks who develop dementia will have to wear an incontinence brief at some point throughout that aging journey. It ends up being the number one reason why families would move a loved one into a care community of some type is around incontinence. So we figured, man, this should be a place we put our flag down, that we're not going to run away from incontinence. We're not going to not design towards this really challenging need. And showing that and trying to visualize, hey, how do a pair of pants make it easier to change a diaper is not easy. And it's something we really struggle with, because we've seen other brands and competitors show in an older adult on a changing table having a nurse with gloves change their diaper. And to us, that crosses this line of, hey, this feels undignified. This feels like we're seeing something we shouldn't see. And it also makes it feel like, hey, if we're trying to normalize things, if we're trying to design something universally, this is not it. So what we try and do is show the function in a fun, graphical way. So we'll have GIFs and videos of the pants in like a 3D rendering without a person wearing them, opening and closing. So it's very clear, oh, you get access here and it fully opens up and you don't have to take the pants off to have access. So you see the benefits and you see the value without sort of that final piece being shown. So we're trusting that the people that come to our site and see our products have the ability to make that connection themselves of who this product is really for and who it can help. And the interesting thing with CareZips is, although it was designed for this really specific case, because we followed universal design principles, we started getting reviews right off the bat of saying, hey, this is the best pants for catheters. And this is the first time I've been able to go on an airplane in 5 years because I feel comfortable again. Or this has been a great solution for my colonoscopy bag. Or I'm in a wheelchair and I use a handheld urinal and this is the best option for it. So we're really grateful that we designed it in a way that was accessible for a bunch of different use cases and needs.
A lot of times when we think about the care that people needs, we sacrifice people's dignity in order to provide care. Right. And one of my favorite things about what y'all do at Joe and Bella is that you allow people to maintain their dignity and maintain their identity regardless of what level of care that they need. Can you talk a little bit more about why clothing and dignity are so intertwined?
Yeah, look, I am a person who I try to think about what I wear as little as possible. But what I wear is what I'm comfortable wearing. I'll have my shirts that say Joe and Bella on it, or my shirts that say Indiana University on it, and I'll have my hoodies. And that's because that's what I've worn for pretty much my entire life. That's now part of my identity. And when our abilities change, because of whether that's age or maybe some physical change that happened, a cognitive change that's occurring, permanent or temporary, and we can no longer wear what we've always worn, we stop feeling like ourselves. And when we stop feeling like ourselves, their depression can set in. I just fundamentally believe our abilities change based upon our mental state. And what we want is the people that wear our clothes to feel like themselves, to feel confident, to feel like they have the ability to extend their independence rather than have their independence taken away from them. We work with a memory care community called Charter Senior Living, who is just a fantastic organization. They have about 60 plus locations across the country. And Charter talks about when someone moves into a care community for the first time, not a Charter location, but others, typically what happens is things that individual used to do at home. And this probably goes for the case too, when a caregiver goes into the house for the first time, a professional caregiver, things that individual used to do on their own, they stop doing on their own. And one of those things is getting dressed. So you move into a care community and on your own, it might take you 30 minutes to get dressed, but with a nurse, maybe you can do that in 10 or 15 minutes. And the nurse is going to help you get dressed because, man, they need all 60 residents to the breakfast room so they can get fed and start their days. And so they're going to try and make that go as quickly and efficiently as possible. But what ends up happening is when individuals stop dressing themselves, they lose the ability to dress themselves. When they stop washing themselves, they lose the ability to wash themselves. So anything that we can do, what other organizations that are creating amazing services and or products for older adults can do to help extend somebody's independence rather than take it away, it can have a meaningful impact on their long-term physical and mental health.
Well, if you weren't an entrepreneur, you would have been a great OT.
I was thinking the same thing.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
That's totally our ethos.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad you said it in those words, because I feel like if we take a step back and look at it from a healthcare perspective and like how we do healthcare in America, it's very siloed and we fix an individual problem, right? You got a doctor for your bones, you got a doctor for your lungs, there's one for every single thing, and you fix that individual thing and then you feel like, okay, that's fixed. But what really is happening, and the reason we even get to that level, is because all of these micro changes and micro decisions that happen far upstream. So to your point about your level of function also actually following your mental health is so key, because yes, it is easier to have somebody else help you get dressed. And that could be a decision that you make. And as long as that means that you have more energy to do the stuff you want to do and keep moving, that's great. But if it means that I don't do that, and therefore I'm also not doing that, and now I'm not doing this other next thing, you're actually decreasing your level of activity. Even though you might be up and dressed, you can't move your own body, right? And you're not problem solving or thinking through things. And especially once we're retired, we don't have a ton of things usually that are like challenging us to do new things. And so that just means that's like a recipe for decline. And so while it may feel like I'm harp on things, like that's why I think it's just so important to have these little things be still as independent as possible, because it leads to continued independence. And then when you look good and feel good, you go do more things, which is what we need to do to keep our bodies moving. So
yeah. And when you feel capable, like if you could do something for yourself, but you don't, and then you lose the ability to do that thing for yourself, then people get depressed because they're like, well, I can't do anything. I can't even do this like simple thing that I used to be able to do. Like, what's going on here? It's terrible for quality of life. It's terrible for mental health, and quality of life and doing the things that we want and need to do. Like, that's really what it's all about. So, and obviously Joe and Bella is helping people do that in spades. And we're really, really thankful for the work you're doing. Thank you for being on the show today. How can people find out more about Joe and Bella? How can they find your products? All that good stuff.
Well, thank you so much for having me for the conversation today. To learn more about Joe and Bella, you can check us out, joeandandbella.com, or we're on all the social medias. So just type in Joe and Bella to any of the socials. You'll find us there as well.
You also can find Joe and Bella on AskSAMIE.com. So that's also key.
Yes.
So we're so glad that we're partnered together. And look at that. I did not even know that Riverside would do that for us. So now we have to do that all the time.
Okay. So if you're listening and not watching, you might go check out the end of the YouTube video because fireworks off everywhere.
Fireworks for Joe and Bella and AskSAMIE.
Can we do it again?
I don't know.
Oh,
yay! That's hilarious.
That is
Okay. I do have one question. That is, when you noticed that your grandmother didn't like the clothes that you had bought that were adaptive, did she ever get a chance to try Joe and Bella clothes?
So unfortunately, she passed before we released our first product. She knew what we were working on. And I know she would have been incredibly proud of what we've built. And I think one of the things that means so much to us is that even though we have big aspirations and we want to have our clothes everywhere, at the core of this is a family business. I'm doing this with my dad, who's retired, and I think she'd been really proud of all of this and see where it's gone.
Well, thank you again for being on this episode of Care Lab. We really appreciate you being here. Listener/viewer, if you made it to the end of the episode, please take a second to like, subscribe, share, follow, leave a comment, leave a review. Those are the best ways to help other people find this type of content that would be really, really helpful to them. Thank you again so much for being on this episode. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you right back here next week on Care Lab.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.